I'm going to hit this. And I quote, "I'll be there in a minute. Give me a second."
Time is relative, folks. Time is relative.
Yes. So, hey, cheers to everybody in the chat. They're a division rival. I don't care how many wins they get. Screw them.
That wasn't the take I was expecting to hear.
I want to gush over watching live Chris Tanev.
I think that we completely underestimate the skill it takes to play defense.
One highlight or several highlights does not a Calder trophy make.
I'm stepping in here. I'm going to be the crotchety old man here. They need to learn patience. They need to understand the tension and everything and the drama.
How dare! Look at this! How is McDavid not getting a penalty?
You guys need to calm down with this, okay? You guys need to calm down with it.
It's kind of tough to be calm right now, Tyler. It has been an emotional week for the Calgary Flames overall. Welcome to the Shifts and Pucks podcast. Of course, you can follow us on social media, Shifts and Pucks, Facebook.com, Shifts and Pucks, YouTube.com, Shifts and Pucks. Subscribe wherever you get your audio. Hello. And it's been also we are in the magic of Christmas. I am here in Swift Coover, British Columbia. Dan, on Friday, I was downtown. The Canucks were playing the Columbus Blue Jackets. It was opening night for Taylor Swift. It was a combination of Canuck jerseys and Swift glitter all over Vancouver. It was quite something.
Shake it off, Kevin. Shake it off.
Yeah. And there was no bad blood. And a few anti-heroes along the way as we get our Taylor Swift puns out of the way. But Dan, it's also magical in Calgary as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on here. I'm sure your listeners don't know, our listeners don't know, but I work part-time as a corporate magician doing stand-up shows and stuff like that. And I've had a heck of a run. I've been doing, I think, 5 shows in the last 3 days. So I'm getting tired, but it's nice to shift gears and talk hockey.
Yes, and most of this is going to be about the Flames. We are going to touch on a couple of situations that I do actually think relate to where the Flames are at.
Talking Flames is why I'm here. I'm like Beetlejuice. Say Flames 3 times and I appear in your podcast.
Flames. I have
You can make it happen if I turn the camera off. Watch this. Say it 3 times, Kevin.
Flames. Where? And I'm tossing a challenge out to Flames podcasters. I'll tease this for a little later.
Dun.
But first, Dan, there is some news from the Flames that just came down about an hour before those listening later have recorded. So ahead of the game for Dallas today, the assistant coach Brad Larson has taken an indefinite leave of absence for the team to attend to a family matter. Don't know what it is. Don't care. I mean, I care, but I don't care in the sense. But all the best to Brad Larson, whatever he and his family are going through.
Yeah, I mean, I hope whatever they're going through, they can, they can sort it out and move past it. But I really, like you said, I don't know why fans want to get involved with the personal lives of these people. Whatever Brad's going through is up to him. I really don't need to know or want to know what's going on there unless Brad wants to share it.
Yeah, exactly. It's like anything else with the Calgary Flames or any other hockey player that's going through things. You just got to let them go through it.
Brad Larson was kind of brought in as not really the associate coach, but in a way the associate coach, kind of the experienced assistant on the team. Do you think the Flames run shorthanded on the coaching staff, or do you think they find somebody else for the rest of the year?
Well, I think it just depends on how long Brad's out, right? I think they'll take it day by day.
Do you think they call Woodcroft?
Well, Merrick did for his first guest.
Yep.
Um,
Another Oilers coach that can't find work after the Oilers.
Yeah. Although apparently he was closing a couple of jobs. So,
Okay.
I just to go on this tangent. I actually think Jake Woodcroft is a really good human being. He was put in a no-win situation on a team with the Oilers that have expectations to win the cup. And I don't know if he was the guy that had the experience to take him to the level that they want to go.
Yeah, and I think in some ways, and it's not just in hockey, but I think in a lot of things in our society now, we conflate good person or good guy with, someone who can do the job. And I think those things sometimes need to be separated out. I mean, Brad Tortorella, right? Good coach. Not a lot of people are going to say outstanding fellow.
Yeah, certainly that's true. I mean, even in Flames history, Bob Hartley was not known to be a good person and was considered a good coach, but his human being skills were not considered great. And then you had Jeff Ward, who was considered a really good human being, but didn't really, I don't think, was a head coach in the National Hockey League.
Yeah, and that's the thing, I mean, even Gulletson, a lot of people liked him, but not an NHL coach. Doesn't mean he was a bad coach, but just in the wrong job.
Yeah. I think one of the things that was always missed, though, Dan, for a intermission event is we missed the Jim Playfair versus Glenn Gulletson throw the stick challenge.
So remember the year that Gully threw the stick? I had media credentials for a Fireside Chat at the time, and I'd suggested, because they had their skills competition about 2 weeks later, and I suggested we put an event in and see who can chuck their stick further than the coach. Put a little rope up there and see who can toss it past there.
They wouldn't go for it?
No.
Oh, damn, that's too bad.
Maybe that's why I no longer have media credentials.
Yeah, that's how you got kicked out, Dan. Speaking of media, I think that this is we can't really get into the Flames without getting into really what happened on Tuesday. And I think that this week, with the road trip and right through to Columbus, I think that this was probably the hardest week for the Flames to get through, just in terms of the emotions. You're going into Columbus for the first time since Johnny passed. You could see Rasmus Anderson mentioned on the game on Friday was the mentally toughest that he ever had to play. And it was just an emotional night right from the beginning when Ryan Leslie interviews Meredith Gaudreau and Meredith shows the tattoo. I think that started to that started the emotional waterworks. And then you had the actual presentation for the Gaudreau family, and they did an amazing video tribute to Johnny Gaudreau. And how many of those
George Canyon's version of Go Johnny Go?
Yeah, that can we get that on iTunes? Like, by the way, and then you also had all of those. I thought it was really touching that they had more than 2 pictures with him and Sean Monahan together, and they brought back the hug from the Dallas series, and just the emotions of Sean Monahan breaking down, and Michael Backlund and Sean Monahan having that hug.
Kevin, not being in the market, you probably missed some of the other small Gaudreau pieces that came out. So all the sticks that were left at the Saddledome, they're making benches out of them and putting them in local arenas. And there was a video that came out earlier in the weekend where the Gaudreau family went to see the first of those benches.
Yeah. No, I did not know that part. And then of course, you had got Guy Gaudreau coaching, being part of the coaching staff on Monday, which, by the way, Torts did as well, by the way, during when Columbus was playing Philadelphia earlier in the year. And then you also had the actual game, and then you had the presentation with the teams on ice together or in the picture together. And then after the game, I thought it was a really great touch, and it sounded like this was not the original idea, but the 3 stars were for 3 were Michael Backlund, 2 Rasmus Anderson, and I think first Johnny Gaudreau, and I think that and just allowing. Like it's been one of the toughest faces to look at. Has been Guy Gaudreau's. You could just feel how hard. I mean, I think they're all obviously wearing this, but just allowing Guy to have that last standing ovation in front of everybody, and the interview he gave after. I unpacked. I don't think that there's ever been a game more emotional for the Flames than that one.
They're all probably hurting, I think, for Guy, and it's probably hard for him, but I think he's sort of taken on the public face of the Gaudreau family during all this, right? We haven't really heard from Jane. We've heard a little bit from Meredith. We haven't heard from the sisters, but I think Guy has taken it upon himself to, wear that publicly, and that's got to be hard too.
Yeah. And then I mean, there's so many other pictures that the things that I saw were Craig Conroy holding little John Gaudreau, Lanny with Jane, giving her a hug. I think those, but I think there's 2 people that need to be highlighted just in terms of the media. I don't think people realize how classy and talented Ryan Leslie is. I mean, I think he is probably one of those guys. Dan, I suspect he probably knows more about the inside workings of the Flames than everybody else. And he has said nothing about anything, but he has just come in there. He does his job. I mean, he not only did he do the interview in Columbus, being at the Gaudreau family, but he does that interview with Meredith and then with Rasmus and Michael and Guy at the end of the game. I mean, the emotional toll that this must have been on Ryan Leslie himself. I think that is like we talk about people that are underrated. Ryan Leslie, I think, is an absolute gem.
Yeah, and I mean, Ryan was with the team. I think he was actually the Flames in-house announcer, which Brendan Parker is now, or the in-house kind of commentator when Johnny was here for a good portion of that. So got to know them better. You're not working for Sportsnet or TSN. You're traveling with the team and there every day. And so, yeah, I think he was the guy to do that because he had that relationship. But I've seen him mature a lot since he started on radio here and going now to where he is. And Ryan, going back to what we were saying earlier, great man. Good at what he does. I think he's maturing every day, and I'm excited to see what could be next for Ryan in his career.
Yeah, I am too. I have a hunch that his regional broadcast dates are numbered, and I think we may see him on a national stage.
And even if he wants to do regional, because I know he has family in the area that he likes being, close to, I could see him moving on to, even doing play-by-play or something like that. I would love to see Ryan Leslie. I think he'd be great at being the voice for the Wranglers. Yeah,
well, yeah. I mean, they do have a talented voice there with Sandra Prusino.
And Sandra, yeah. But I mean, at some point, everybody moves on, right? I'm not saying get rid of Sandra and bring him in, but maybe as the sort of succession plan there.
Yeah. 2 other people I wanted to highlight here. Again, another gem. He is done yeoman's work absorbing the complaints from Flame fans, the debates from Flame fans for well over 15 years, 10 to 15. I mean, I don't know how long he's been. But Pat Steinberg is another gem. And I thought just a classy move by him making Johnny the number 1 star. I thought he read the room. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah. And he read the room. He did, I think, what everybody wanted. It was unexpected. Great for Beasley to be able to, rip out the Johnny Gaudreau call again that we'll probably never hear another time in our lives. And, I thought it was great for Pat to do that. I think it was a fitting end to that game.
Yeah.
Kevin, are you disappointed that 13's not in the rafters right now?
No, I think that there's time to. We just went through a pretty emotional baggage of stuff. I think that we can. I think the retire of the number and all of that can wait.
I think you wait till the kids are older when they can appreciate dad's work. And I mean, there's still, Meredith is still pregnant. Like, wait till that child is old enough to understand it. And I think the day will come, but this wasn't the day.
Yeah, I saw a couple of questions about that, and to me, like, just, I think one of the other things, I'll touch on the final one here in a second, but I think one of the things that I absolutely think the Flames want to do is make sure that they maintain that relationship with the Gaudreau family. I mean, Craig Conroy was the guy that discovered Johnny Gaudreau. So I think for him, there's a special meaning for that. And when the all quarter, I don't know if you heard this, Dan, that they are doing, the NHL is going to do the all quarter teams. So all the teams are going to have they're from whoever played from 2000 to 2025, 6 forwards, 4 defensemen, 2 goalies. Johnny Gaudreau is on that team. That's just a no-brainer. There's going to be other ways that you're going to honor and recognize Johnny throughout the Flames' time.
Yeah, I mean, even if you look at Chris Snow, right? I mean, at the rookie camp, the Flames have the Snowy Cup that the guys play for. And, we've had Team Vernon versus Team McDonald there. Like, even if you were to put something in like, Team McDonald versus Team Gaudreau, or have a Johnny Cup for, I don't know, the top scorer, like, it'll happen. I could even see them, bringing Guy Gaudreau in to do a little bit of scouting for them or something. Like, they will keep that relationship there. And there's a personal relationship, like you said, with Craig and the family. And as well as I do, Kevin, if the Gaudreaus need something, the Flames will make sure that need is met.
So I just, as far as numbers and all of that, I think just wait. I mean, you also have the question of when does Johnny Gaudreau get into the Hall of Fame? When do you have that debate? A lot of other things that you can do.
And I think that this Johnny Gaudreau thing has probably had to open up a discussion with the Hall of Fame and teams of, we've never really had an active player of this level pass away during their career. And so what is the protocol? How long should they wait to go in the Hall of Fame? How long should we wait to put their number in the rafters? Like, I doubt this discussion has ever really been had in the NHL.
Yeah.
And so this is probably helping to, sort of like when we had COVID years ago and nobody really knew what to do. We'd never had something of this magnitude and we made it up as we went. I think this is probably helping the league say, okay, we've never had this. How do we move forward in this scenario?
Yeah, exactly.
And what do we do? Sadly, we know what'll happen next time.
Yeah. Yeah, the closest one that I could think of, I mean, there was Luc Bourdon was not, like, he never had a chance to play a significant. I don't even know if he ever had a chance to play in the NHL, but that was a sad one. Actually, Pelly Lindbergh in Philadelphia was probably the closest to stature.
And I think both those guys were big in their market, but not outside their market.
Yeah. And then, of course, this is the second time that the Flames had this. I mean, Steve Chason, rest his soul. Steve Montador, rest his soul. George Palawa was a draft pick in the late 80s, first-round pick, unfortunately.
But both those guys, too, like, Chason did not pass away as an active NHLer.
No, and I don't think Montador did either.
No. So, and, I mean, it's not uncommon for alumni to pass. And I said this on our show. I mean, looking at the age of some of these guys, Lanny's in his 70s. Like, how much longer are we going to have Lanny around and stuff like that? Like, I think it's different when it's somebody like that who passes, right? And it's going to be sad. Some of those guys from the early 80s that played for the team are getting up there. And that's going to be sad. But it's different when it's, a guy who's 31, who's in an active part of his career.
Yeah, for sure. And a family man and all of that. So yeah, there's lots to get through. There's the new event center / arena that is being built. There's going to be ways to honor him going forward. So I think they did. I thought really Tuesday night was perfect. I didn't think they needed to go anywhere else. And you have to also think about this from the Columbus perspective as well. How many times have they had to answer these questions about Johnny Gaudreau as they're traveling on the road? They've had their own emotional stuff. They got their own stuff, and you had the Blue Jackets broadcaster on your show.
Yeah, Jay from Lockdown Blue Jackets came on to talk to us about how things went kind of from the Blue Jackets end.
Yeah. I just think they want to just get back to focusing on hockey as well, right? And just get through this. And I got to tell you, Dan, honestly, just another tangent. I think I don't think Columbus is going to make the playoffs, but I think they're going to compete for a spot. I really do. I really think that team is really skilled. Their defensive game is, if we could trade the Columbus scoring to the Calgary Flames and the Flames defensive record to the Blue Jackets, it somehow, as a magician, if you could combine those two, probably would help both organizations. But
even with my skills, I'm still bound by the salary cap.
Yeah, that's totally fair.
And I have to imagine, I mean, Columbus did their sort of Johnny celebration of life, if you want to call it that, earlier in the season. And so I think for them, they'd put that behind them in a way. But I have to imagine this was the end of that whole saga. You've been to Calgary. You've kind of put a bow on it. Now we need to move forward.
Yeah. There is an emotional game coming up this month, I believe this week, actually. I believe Matthew Tkachuk and the Florida Panthers are coming to Calgary on Thursday.
They are coming this week for sure, yeah.
Do they get a standing ovation?
The Florida Panthers come on Saturday.
Do they get cheered?
They, as a team?
Well, I imagine this might be a little emotional for Matthew Tkachuk, kind of made back to the place that, first of all, on one level, this is, of course, him and Johnny were connected. But the other thing is Matthew won the cup. He beat the Oilers. He says at the end, "I hate Edmonton." Do the Flame fans give him a cheer?
I think he will probably get cheered. I don't know the whole team will.
No, but
How many penalty minutes does Lomberg get going after his old buddies?
Yeah.
And do we see a Lomberg-Tkachuk scrap?
I don't know if we see a Lomberg-Tkachuk scrap. But
I said on our show when we recorded yesterday, I think, sadly, Florida's going to light up the Flames. Like, I think Tkachuk alone will light up the Flames.
Yeah, they're the best team I've seen in the East so far. They're going to be really tough to beat. We'll get in, again, teasing the challenge that I have coming up. Let's get to the news of the Flames, because there was a lot that happened this week, and you talk about the emotions. I don't want to say he was the emotional leader, but he certainly brought in a sense of emotion and connection with the Flame fans. Justin Kirkland's done for the year with an injury that he got at the Columbus game. And I feel really bad for him because, I mean, anyone that loses their season, I feel bad for. But in particular, this guy found his NHL game, and he was coming in as a UFA next season, like Anthony Mantha. I do think this is a fairly significant loss for the Flames, and I think it's just really unfortunate. We'll get into the offense in a second. Was he the most offensive guy? No,
but he wasn't expected to be.
No, but he brought in some fourth line minutes. He was found money. He scored in it. Like, Ryan Huska found a way to use Justin Kirkland, and so I think that it's been really tough. I think that that's a tough loss.
The Flames have canceled their Costco membership for the year, but I think that he will be back next year. Like, I'm penciling him in with the Flames contract on the top 13 next season.
Yeah, I could imagine that. I think he'll be on the team. And he's got some versatility that he can play the center on the wing. So, yeah, I think that what the fascinating situation is on this is I wonder if they learn from the Oliver Shillington situation to not assume what this guy thinks he is worth. And I think on both sides. I think on Justin Kirkland, I wonder if he learns from the Oliver Shillington situation and not overvalue himself, and on the Flame side, not assume that he's just coming back.
I think the big difference between the two, though, is like Shillington had some NHL experience and NHL money behind him. He was making like $2 million here. Justin Kirkland has what, I think 76 NHL games to his name, not even.
Yeah.
So I mean, if he asks for anything more than, let's say, 850,000, I don't think anybody gives it to him. Like, sure, he had a couple good games here. A couple good games is not making NHLer, right?
No, that's fair.
I think that and especially losing most of his season, I think you take whatever you're offered if you're Shillington. I think this is if you're Kirkland, unlike Shillington, like I don't think you're waiting for a long-term deal. I don't think anyone's coming to you like Shillington wanted, looking for long-term. I think you've got to do this again. I mean, he played 21 games with the Flames this year, 2 with Arizona last year, 7 with Anaheim the year before. So he's got 30 NHL games total. This guy's not getting any more than an entry-level deal again.
No, that's fair. But he's played 30 games, 8 points. But there's still some value. And then because you always have the counter argument is that the cap is going up, Dan, the cap is going up, right? So you still have to both organize.
The cap is going up, but I also feel like if you're a guy like Justin Kirkland, you realize that your value is being a cap-friendly fourth liner.
Yeah, exactly.
And if I was the Flames, and I think any GM, I'd say, great, you look good for 20 games. Do it again. Then let's talk money.
Yeah, that's exactly what I would say as well. But
you got hurt. That sucks. Go do it again. Then let's talk money.
Yeah. And I mean, it's also a situation that, if he's
going to be 29 next year. Like, I don't know. You can ask for a lot more as a 29-year-old who's played 30 games.
Yeah, if he signs a 1-year deal that you could probably, if you're not in a playoff scenario next year, you could probably trade. You could probably use that as a valuable trade chip, and you might
I don't know how valuable that's going to be. I think everyone has
a little bit more than. You might get a little bit more than you think, right? Like you're probably going to get a lower level draft pick, but instead of a 5th, it might turn out to be a 4th, right? So.
Yeah, and I mean, if he wants to stay here, I could see. I mean, if I was Craig Conroy, then the most I would do next year would be 2 years, 2 ways.
Yeah.
You had an ACL injury. Let's see how you recover. You might need some time in the A. I mean, it kind of reminds me of when Rooney came in. And we're not saying you're an NHLer. You looked good, but we want that option to send you down, or at least 2-way for the first year on it.
Yeah. If Cole Schwindt was still here, he's probably not. He's probably with the Wranglers.
Yeah, I agree. And how often does that happen, right? You're in the right place at the right time, and that's how your career starts.
Yeah. But there was a couple of call-ups, not just one. There was 2. Jakob Pelletier was called up this week. He does score a goal against St. Louis. And Walker Duehr got called up as well. And Adam Klapka was sent down. First of all, let's talk about Pelletier. I think the more closer to the NHL impact. I thought he looked pretty solid. He scores a goal against St. Louis. He certainly didn't look out of place. Probably, I mean, Ryan Huska pointed out a mistake he made against St. Louis, but I think I think for now he's someone that I can see in the lineup.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't look great in that first game. He was kind of invisible. He didn't look bad, but he didn't stand out. The second game, he got his goal. He made mistakes, but, you're a call-up. You're kind of expecting these guys to make mistakes. And we have to remember there is a difference between the level of play in the American League and the level of play at the NHL. And, it takes some time to adjust to that. I think he looks fine right now in 2 games, a very limited, set of data to look at. But he looks fine as a third-line guy. I don't know I would push him much higher up the lineup than that, but as a 4th or third-line guy, I think he's looking okay so far. But let's see how he looks after 4 more games this week.
Yeah, he'll have a busy week, but I think Ryan Huska has always projected Jakob Pelletier as a bottom 6 guy. I don't think Ryan Huska has ever thought of Jakob Pelletier as a top 6 forward.
No, and I don't think. I mean, even his predecessor Daryl Sutter didn't, right? But I think fans often expect he's a first-round pick, therefore he must be this, monster guy on our first line. And I think sometimes the the fans are the ones that I mean, remember when Backlund came in and he was still trying to figure out what kind of a player he was in the first couple of years, and fans were like, oh, trade Backlund, he's not the offensive dynamo. I think fans often have these huge expectations on any guy drafted in the first round,
and you have to find your footing to get yourself through that. Like a good example of that would be a Luke Shen. Luke Shen was a high top 10 pick, and he's found himself sort of as a solid defensive defenseman in the NHL that is not necessarily top 4, but he's a guy that's going to help your lineup, right?
Yeah.
So,
well, I mean, I think Backlund's an example of that as well.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, it's interesting. While you're mentioning, Pelletier, I mean, fans were upset with Daryl Sutter for the way that he quote unquote treated Pelletier and Matthew Phillips, 2 guys fans thought were these amazing players getting underutilized. Maybe Daryl was on something because I mean, and where's Phillips now?
Yeah, he's in the Colorado. I believe he's in the Colorado.
He's in the system, but he's not this offensive dynamo fans thought he was going to be. Everyone's like, oh, he's going to Washington. He's going to play with Ovechkin and he's going to light it up.
Yeah, because Mitch Love was there. He's everything worked out, and that didn't happen.
So I mean, and I think that's another example of trust the hockey people in some case to evaluate the hockey guys.
Yeah. The other guy in that little trifecta was Glenn Godden, that a lot of fans had really high expectations of and didn't turn out either. So
no, but one of the top scorers in the AHL this year.
Yeah. 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 And actually, the other thing that people forgot is, and I think that there's a little bit more context to what I'm about to say, but Sutter played him more than Ryan Huska did. If you look at the average ice time at that year that Daryl Sutter had him and Ryan Huska had him, it was much different.
But how much of that was the injury?
I think probably a lot of it was the injury.
Right? Like, I think Daryl played him because he was healthy. I think he was out and, he didn't look great for Huska to be able to play him.
But he wasn't exactly lighting up the league offensively, though, either, right? Like, because they threw him with Sutter. They threw him with his dad, and they never really – they thought that would be the spark for both of them, and that never really, really happened. Like – I think that people were like, I think one of the things that I think people need to get over, in a sense, is this argument around like you're not doing good asset management with your one of the things that I will push back on is the Flames drafting has actually been a lot better than I think a lot of people realize. Their draft development model is actually working. Like we talked about Johnny Gaudreau was a mid-round pick. Dustin Wolf was a 7th-round pick. Was Jakob Pelletier a first-round pick? Like we have these expectations that the Flames are entitled to do something with a first-round pick, but he was a late first-round pick, and like you could almost argue he would have probably been he would have been a 2nd-round pick if he wasn't picked by by the Flames. He ends up being a 2nd-round pick. So you probably...
Yeah, I mean, Zari late first, right? And then Postel, a guy the Flames fans love right now, 4th-round pick.
Yeah, so the Flames drafting is... Like, there's going to be mistakes. I mean, the Lane Hudson, Tony situation notwithstanding, I'll grant you that. But I think the Flames overall have done a pretty good job. And, like... I don't think the Flames, when they drafted Jakob Pelletier, expected him to light up the league. And I think the Flames, so I think that I think the injuries set him back too. But if they get a 10 to 15 goal scorer out of Jakob Pelletier, I think that's the win.
Yeah, I mean, the way I've started to look at drafts, and I'm, by no means a scout or anything, but I've looked at it as if you can get sort of one roster-ish player out of every draft, you're doing well. So if your first round doesn't turn out, how do you do in your 2nd round or 3rd round or 4th round, that sort of thing, and if you can kind of add one guy a year. So, we look at that draft Pelletier came from. Pelletier was the first pick. They didn't have a 2nd round. They took Nikolaev on the 3rd. That didn't work out. Lucas Fuchs, Josh Nodler, and Dustin Wolf. So if we look at that 2019 draft as Wolf being the key piece, they've still done pretty well there.
Yeah. The other guy that was called up was Walker Dewar. I think Walker Dewar is. He looked. I will say this: Walker Dewar looked closer to original Walker Dewar than last year Walker Dewar.
Last year's terrible.
Yeah. It just didn't work for him. I don't know. I think he felt like he was an NHLer and didn't put the work in, and now it looks like he's putting the work in. And I think if he puts the work in, I think that this is a guy that the Flames can call up and down. I'm not sure. I kind of like the way that he was with a couple years ago. I had some high hopes for him. I think
now he's 27, so I don't think he goes up and down, but I think he's your epitome of a 13th forward.
Yeah, he's on sorry to quote Drew Doughty, a team like this.
Yeah.
I think if he's on a team like Winnipeg, he's in the minors.
Yeah, and I mean, he's, again, talking about the Flames drafting here, and I think this is another key piece there, is he's undrafted. The Flames have done a really good job as well of finding those undrafted pieces to add in, for free, essentially. Walker Dewar had a decent, in 22-23, he played 27 games and 11 points. I think this is a guy who needed a confidence boost. And I think sending him down to the Wranglers gave him that. He got to be the big fish in a small pond. In 20 games this year, he had 19 points. And maybe he makes a living as a really good AHLer. I mean, there's guys that's their calling and that's the living they make. And, nothing wrong with that. But I think if he's going to be in the NHL, I don't think, again, just like Pelletier, he makes it much higher than your third line.
Yeah.
This is the kind of guy, though, that I could see, and we see guys like this every year who you'll always have a job because somebody needs that type of player.
Yeah. He's a valuable piece for an organization.
Yeah, but I could see his career being like the next Brett Sutter and just kind of being a career AHLer, a really good career AHLer.
I mean, he's a guy that could be a captain with the Wranglers one day.
Mm-hmm.
Like, as this team goes forward, as the Wranglers go forward. So those two call-ups happened, which meant there was a healthy scratch this week, Dan, and it was Andrei Kuzmenko. Andrei Kuzmenko has 1 goal, the exact same amount as Jakob Pelletier has this year, by the way. I know that there was some snickering about me suggesting Kuzmenko is going on waivers, but
we've probably given you a harder time than we should have, Kevin.
I kind of look at it like this, though. I think that this becomes, with Pelletier coming up, this becomes a very interesting decision of what they do going forward with. I think at some point here, let's blend this in. The Flames have now gone 24 games without scoring more than 3 goals, which is a franchise record. The NHL record, by the way, is 27. They are 30th in 5-on-5 goals. They're 8th in goaltending and goals against this year. At some point, they have to address this offensive situation. I think whether or not you believe that they're a playoff team or a team that needs to fizzle out or not, they need to find a way to get more offense. And there's a lot more to this. I mean, I think Sharangovich came back too early, but Kadri, although his numbers in the third period are really great, he hasn't produced. Jonathan Huberdeau is one of the leaders in scoring, but team leaders, in scoring, not league leaders in goals. But it's just not getting overall enough offense. And I think the loss of Mantha and Kuzmenko, I think Kuzmenko getting 1 goal has been in part of that. But how
do you address it, though?
Yeah. Well, that's what I was going to say. I mean, at some point, do they go out and find somebody? But I guess here's the other part of this situation is if they decide, let's either A, bring another call up, or B, we make a trade, and they have to send someone on waivers, who are they sending down? Are they going to take the risk of Pelletier giving him a second crack at waivers? Or do you throw Kuzmenko on waivers?
You can't afford to. Kuzmenko on waivers, we did this math yesterday when we recorded. You almost fall to the salary floor.
So you have to hope that we'll have to hope that someone takes a salary.
You know, right now though, I mean, but why do you have to send him down? Why don't you just scratch him, make him your number 13?
Well, I guess the question is, do you, if the Flames decide that they need to find some sort of offensive spark in the trade market,
okay,
you're going to have to move somebody.
I don't see why you spend an asset to get another piece this year. Like this year, the Flames are not expected to be a good team. Why spend the asset this year?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I guess the other way to look at that is I guess the other way that I would look at that though is they do need to address the skill in this organization. So I do think before the draft they will have to make a move, whether it's in the in-season trade deadline or not. I do think that they have to. They do need to acquire skill via trade because I don't think they are going to just get it through the draft.
Sure, but if you think that, wait till the offseason or, the deadline. I think you can move Kuzmenko at the deadline and free up a spot. I think, Mantha's out of here at the end of the season. If you really need to send a guy down, I think Rooney is the safest waiver choice.
Yeah, probably. But then you're sending down a center too.
But even if you call up a guy from the farm, I mean, is Rory Kieran's going to come in and turn this organization around? I don't know. I think you've got the two best guys in the AHL on the NHL roster now.
Yeah.
If Rory Kieran's is our savior, great, but I'm not convinced he is.
I don't think he is either.
I think you could send Dewar back down, and I don't think you're going to lose him.
No. I do think there's a risk of losing Pelletier, though.
I think there could be, yeah. I mean, to me,
not a huge risk.
Yeah, I think at this point, if you want to waive Kuzmenko and see if anyone's interested, great. I don't think you can afford to send him down, though, because you need him to get to the floor. But I think if you got to get rid of a body, Walker Dewar's the odd man out. And I would just leave Kuzmenko in the press box. I think the other thing, and we talked about this when you were on our show, Kuzmenko does a lot in the dressing room. I think there's going to be something that you're going to lose from a dressing room perspective if you trade him.
Yeah, but he's got to score more than one goal. And he's got to get more involved when he's on the ice. And maybe you put him back in during these next couple of games and see where he's at. But I mean, I'm assuming he's going to play at some point within the next.
But why does he have to get more than one? Why? I mean, what 13th forward do we expect to get more than a goal? Leave him as your 13. I think his NHL time is done. Right? And just let him kind of be that guy.
I do think what I think my point is that at some point the Flames need to produce a little bit more offense than they have. And I think it's very clear that they've decided scoring by committee is most part the way to go, but they do need more offense. They cannot continue to they're going to have to score 4 goals in one game at some point. You cannot just completely rely on Wolf and Vladar throughout the year to keep it at 3 goals and under.
Yeah,
that's where I that's why I think you need Kuzmenko to at least score a little bit more. Does he need to does he need to blow the league away? No. Does he need to produce a little? I think if everybody just produced a little bit more, I think things are fine. I don't think you need Blake Coleman to be at a 30-goal pace. I don't even think you need Sharon Govich to be at a 30-goal pace. And I don't even think you need a guy in the top 35 at scoring. But if everybody just does a little bit more offense, I think they're okay.
But again, why do you need more offense? This is not a team. Sure, it's exciting that they're second in the division right now. But going into the season, these guys were expected to be near the bottom of the league. They're scoring exactly how that you need to for what they were projected to be. Maybe the discussion here, Kevin, and maybe you and I are on a different page. Do the Flames, remember the year that the Flames went out and traded big assets for Yarncroke, right? Is this the year? Do we say, hey, we're second in the division, let's go all in and try to make the playoffs? And if so, or if we're giving up assets to get a scorer, how is that going to set us back? Like, I think you have to.
No, I'm not saying that they need to even add a high-end major skill piece this year, but if they can find that, I think. I think just from a marketing sense, where the Flames are going, like, you probably just want a touch more excitement to make sure that the fans are still coming to. And I think the fans will come anyway.
They haven't had a hard time selling tickets this year.
They have or have not?
They have not, from what I've seen.
Yeah, but as this year goes on and they start fading, it would, goals do. As much as I'm more of a defensive guy, goals do help. That's
sure.
all.
Yeah, I mean, goals definitely help, but I think you will see the Flames bringing it forward. I think you'll see them take somebody's cap dump. Yeah. So I think you'll see I think you will see a change to this forward group, but I don't want them to go out and spend assets to get a better scorer this year. I mean, tickets for the year are sold, right? So I think at this point, you run with what you've got. You look in the offseason. Maybe you get somebody's capped up. Maybe Parekh comes in and that sells some tickets. Maybe, there's a lot of things that could happen in the offseason. But for this year, I think you run what you got and you get the results you get.
Yeah. By the way, just in terms of standings, for the first time this year, the Edmonton Oilers have passed the Calgary Flames in standings. They have 32. Flames have 31. I suspect this week, Dan, I will have to listen to your predictions, but I think that this is probably the week that we see the Flames fall out of a playoff spot.
It's going to be a tough week for the Flames.
Yeah, they've got the 2 road games, Dallas and Nashville. At some point, Nashville will win a game. They got Dallas and then you got Florida this week. You've got a really tough week with Boston and Florida. I think this is probably the week that they fall out of this.
We keep saying it, but when do the Flames regress to the mean? When do the Flames regress to the mean? And I think this is the week that they regress to the mean.
Yeah. I agree. I think that they slowly fall out here. So, and I think maybe that will probably bring out some different conversations. But yeah, I think that there's they'll fade out, but I think, and that goaltending of Vladar and Wolf, although it's been great, I think that probably will have a little bit of a regression as well. I think that's only to be expected with a goalie, and a guy that has never really been a starter in this league. I think that's a fair expectation too. So,
but again, they can afford that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that was by design for this year.
Yeah.
I know it's hard being in a market when the team, and I feel it too, I'm a Flames fan, when the team is designed to not be good, right? But I think we have to look at the other side of, it's short-term pain for long-term gain. And well, yeah, you're right. Goals draw money. We want a good team. No team has been good forever, and the Flames have never been a really bad team. So let's go through the cycle that everybody goes through, and let's come out the other side.
Yeah.
They've never really rebuilt, let's be honest.
I'll push back on that.
When did they do a proper rebuild?
I would argue that they attempted to do one with the Young Guns.
I think the Young Guns was they couldn't afford to pay US dollars at the time.
Yeah, but so they had to go through, again, this is what part of this whole debate, but
were they rebuilding, or were they just bad because it's all they could afford? I mean, that's at the time we were seeing Canadian teams leaving the market, right? We were seeing Winnipeg leaving. We saw Quebec leaving. Like, I don't know if it was a rebuild or it's this is what we can afford team.
I think that was as close to the word that they were doing, but they did not draft very well during that time either, with the Rico Fata and the Daniel Tkachuk, not Matthew Tkachuk, drafts that year too. They didn't hit on their first round picks.
Yeah, and more than just that year, right? I mean, there was a number of years. I mean, Todd Simpson is the captain, right? Yeah. That was not a good time, but I still don't know if that was a deliberate rebuild or if it was just a what we can afford scenario. When we were seeing Canadian teams going over the border, I think it was more of a desperation move.
Yeah. Well, the Flames were close to going over that border too. that people forget that they had the SOS before the 04 run, and Daryl Sutter came in. But
well, even before 04, I think it was like 97 when they did the season ticket drive, and if they didn't sell enough, they were going to move, and that's when Pengrowth took the naming of the Saddle Dome and all that last minute.
Yeah.
Do you think whatever happens with Kuzmenko this year, do you think he's back in the National Hockey League next year?
I think some team will want his.
I think a team might want him. I think he'll be able to get more money back home, and I think he'll go home. Like, I don't think anyone's going to get nearly what he's getting now.
Yeah. I think we're in the area that you need to be a pretty solid two-way player to be in the National Hockey League. Like, you cannot just be a defensive player and not an offensive player, and you cannot be just an offensive player and not be a defensive player. And I think that makes it really tough for Kuzmenko. And I don't think his personality is suited to be in the minors. I think he likes to score goals. I think he goes back to Europe. I think that makes the most sense for him.
Yeah, I mean, if you're an NHL team, I can't see anybody offer him more than about $1.5 million. Like, I think everyone's got someone probably better than him at this point. I don't know if he wants to play for $1.5 million. I could see him shopping offers, but I have a feeling he will be in a KHL jersey come the start of the season.
And there's a lot of teams that have some forwards that are really in the situation that they're on the cusp where they're probably too good for the AHL, but not quite ready for the NHL. And you're probably going to end up paying them cheaper than what you would Andrei Kuzmenko and probably have a more productive forward.
Yeah.
Right? Like, just off the top of my head, I'm thinking of a guy like Brad Lambert in Winnipeg, right? I think he's a guy that you end up keeping in Winnipeg for more part than you would pay for an Andrei Kuzmenko.
Yeah, and I think, even if you look at training camp invites, like those kind of guys that often get signed as an invite, I think you'd find guys there the teams would rather shell out for than Kuzmenko.
Yeah.
I don't think the Flames get a lot for him at the deadline. Like, I think you take whatever someone offers, even if it's a seventh or future considerations or conditional future considerations or whatever it might be.
Or future considerations.
Well, what if I don't promise to consider you in the future, but I will under certain conditions?
What if I just say, okay, what if I say under Kuzmenko 3 times? Is that future considerations?
I'm waiting for a team to trade for present considerations.
Yeah.
I'll consider you right now. Never again. But, like, whatever you can get, I think you move him. And if you don't, you keep him as your 13th forward. But I don't think he's back anywhere next year. I can see a team offering like a 6 for him just to bring in some depth if Calgary will eat half. And I can totally see something like that happening. But I think he was an experiment. And the experiment's over. It sort of reminds me of the Roman Cervenka experiment. It was a whole lot less costly for Calgary.
Yeah. Well, I mean, really, the Canucks, you had to take some salary back to make that Elias Lindholm trade work. And that ultimately, I will say that, like, it turns out to be that trade ends up probably being a win for the Flames, even with Kuzmenko not necessarily working out, because you were able to get a first-round pick. You're able to get a couple of defensive prospects that, in Hunter Buskevich that, it has a good shot with the Flames within the next few seasons. And Yoni Yerma will be a steady force with the Wranglers. And we'll see where Gradin ends up. But you got some draft picks and got some draft capital out of it that you don't need the Kuzmenko to work to make that be an official win.
For sure. And I think the Flames want a certain mix of veterans and young players on their team. And even if I think you could find a better veteran to go in that spot than Kuzmenko.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. But it is, I guess we'll see what Kuzmenko does this week. But you've got a situation where there is competition for spots with Pelletier, Kuzmenko, and Dewar. I think there will be a competition, and don't count Adam Klapka not coming back. I think that Ryan Huska likes Adam Klapka. I think they like his size. He's kind of a big oak tree out there. And
I don't know Klopka will be back this year just because, as we've talked about, forward numbers, but I can see him being on the opening day roster next year.
yeah, I mean, he's not done with the organization.
No,
So,
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he'll be here for a while. And I mean, I could see Dewar and Pelletier potentially staying in the NHL next year, the Kuzmenko spot going to Klopka.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would argue, I think that there's an effective argument that Klopka has been generally more effective at his role than Kuzmenko has been at his role.
For sure, yeah. But again, Klopka knows what his role is, right? When you're signed to a $5 million contract, your role is not bottom six forward, which is where Kuzmenko's been for a while, right? And so, yeah, I mean, we knew coming in that Kuzmenko was not effective at his role. That's why he was traded to Calgary.
Yeah.
I mean, we could argue Lindholm hasn't been effective at his role either.
The Bruins are starting to play a little bit better. So, I mean, he certainly did not get off to a good start in Boston. I will agree with you there. But the Bruins are starting to kind of get it a little bit together there. As they are, where are they right now? They're third in their division. So they're only a point behind Toronto and 3 behind Florida. Like, they're not, they've won 4 in a row. So they've got the coach bump is hitting there for sure.
It is.
But yeah. Not the only Flames news this week. The World Junior Selection Camp was revealed on Monday, and two names were not on there that I think surprised a lot of people. One was Zane Parekh originally, but an injury has caused to a Kamloops Blazer defenseman has allowed Zane Parekh to be back on the roster. And while I get that name, I'm pulling that name up here just to make sure I have it pronounced correctly. I think that I think Zane Parekh is the most interesting first round pick that the Flames have picked since Matthew Tkachuk. In terms of, like, there is some incredible, immense talent, but there's also a lot. Harrison Brunicky is the player that got injured for Kamloops. That's not part of that Parekh replaced. But, and I mean, I think that there's a lot of people argued for Parekh to be on this junior team. So I think that there's a lot of questions with Hockey Canada, but he's so interesting because, I mean, he's had a couple of suspension situations face him this year. He also, I don't know if you saw online, he made an incredible play in a game last night. He's such an intriguing prospect. Like, he's got this talent and he's got these flaws that I think, he's going to be an interesting guy when he wears I do believe he's going to play NHL games with the Flames. I have no doubt about it, but I think he's going to be, this guy striking me as a guy that I think is going to be polarizing going forward. I think, is that a fair way to say it?
Yeah, I mean, I think you want a guy who plays with some passion. You want a guy who plays with some heart, which I think he does. And I wonder how much of the Parekh stuff is him being young versus, is this going to fall into the NHL? The Flames are known as an organization, I think, where you do a lot of media stuff and you're in the spotlight. And I think the Flames would, really rein that in. And even when you saw, what was it? I'm trying to think of the season, but we saw Tkachuk here, and he said, like, Giordano pulled me aside and said, I can't do some of the stuff anymore, right? So I think the Flames could maybe rein this in. And I think some of this is him being young and dumb. And I think the other thing that we forget a lot of times, Kevin, is these guys playing junior are in smaller towns where they're kind of the biggest deal in the small town. And I think sometimes ego gets to you as a junior player in that way too.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that that's part of it. I do agree with that. And I think he got a really humbling experience at training camp this year, where I think he came in kind of expecting to make the team, quite frankly, which is, what, I don't think that's, please don't get me wrong. I think that is a good goal to have. I think it's fair to say that he got a humble pie with the Flames at training camp this year.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, I mean, we've seen guys in the past who are young and sort of grew out of this phase, and we've seen guys that haven't. And I want to think he'll always play with some passion and some grit, but I think he'll grow out of some of this, or at least have a good babysitter, if you will, to sort of make sure it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Sean Kelso and the team here who run media relations stuff, I mean, I think that they can clamp down on some of that. And like you said, I think the Flames, they humbled them already. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's, you know what, we gave you an NHL job. You kind of screwed it up by doing X or Y. So, to the Wranglers with you, I think that they will give this guy the patience it's going to take to get him NHL ready.
Yeah.
And I would say that even a guy like Tkachuk, he grew out of a lot of his shenanigans. I mean, even look at Florida now. We're not seeing a lot of that, right? And I think it happens sometimes. I think with Tkachuk, there was a little bit of a second generation cockiness in a way, but he grew out of it. And I think Parekh will too.
Yeah. I'm with you. I think it's just a humbling experience, and him not in a lot of ways, I kind of like the fact that there's a chip on this kid's shoulder now. He wasn't an original pick for Team Canada. He got sent down. I think that might help him a little bit too. Just kind of, as Jakob Pelletier said this week, have a good look in the mirror, right?
Yeah, I think it shows you're not the heir apparent, right? I mean, and I think we see this a lot with especially first, guys drafted number 1. I'm the next best thing these guys have, and I have to be treated a certain way. And you're right. I think maybe it shows that, you've got to work for what you want and what you've got, and you're not just going to be handed it because you were drafted high.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, again, we go back to what we expect from first rounders. You're not entitled to play just because you're a first rounder. And I've talked to guys who played in the WHL, the OHL, the QMJHL, and even like the AJHL. And again, they've said, you're in a small town, not so much if you're playing for the Hitmen, but you're playing for like the, Regina team or Brandon, and you're the biggest deal in town. And they said sometimes that will inflate your ego a little bit. Yeah. And one thing I remember from Zane Parekh, watching him at the Young Stars Classic in Penticton, I wouldn't say that he floated. That's the wrong way, but I think he was very casual in his skating, that I was like, this guy plays in the NHL this way, he's going to get clobbered. Someone is just going to lay a hit on him, and he's going to get physically dominated the way he's playing.
And it's a little bit different for defensemen, but I've always remembered this. When we had Theo Fleury on our show, he told us the biggest challenge for forwards coming into the NHL is when you're in the age, or when you're in the Canadian junior leagues and you're really good, you have one job: get in front of the net and someone will get you the puck. When you're in the NHL, we were talking about Sam Bennett when he said this, you have to learn how to go get the puck. Yeah. And he said that's often the challenge there, is you're not just being fed the puck like you were in junior. So, I think Parekh might be in a similar scenario.
Yeah, I think so.
And I think even if you're Zane Parekh, I mean, we can have the debate if you think Anderson gets traded or not another time, but I think Parech's not going to come into Calgary being your number 1 or number 2 C. And I think that helps to put some of the I think that helps to get some of the pressure off him too. If he comes in as a 3C, 4C, 5C, if you're paired with Jake Bean next year, for example, I think that, you're not gonna have that inflated ego. Look at me, I'm the best guy. And it also sets the team, hey, you screwed up, you're being benched tonight.
Well, I think, I said this back at training camp, and, they were Parekh and Brzykowicz. Brzykowicz wasn't ready for the NHL. Parekh, I think Parekh is going to have to spend some time with the Wranglers before we see him play NHL games. And I mean, we saw that with Rasmus too, right? I mean,
yeah. And to me, there's no problem with that. I mean, we're in a rebuild. We want to take it slow. If these guys need that time, that's what the American League is there for. Yeah. And you've heard me say this on our show and on your show. Great. You want to go watch them? Go watch a Wranglers game. It's not like they're in Stockton anymore. I think give them that time. Let them go through that process, and they're going to be better for it. And I've said this for years. I think part of the issue with Sam Bennett is he needed AHL seasoning.
Yeah, I think Sam Bennett would agree with that too. And it's the development model. Just because just because you're a high pick, you still need to learn this game. This game in the NHL is a hard game to play. It's not.
And
NHL.
I think we often forget the teams that are in the, let's say, top 5 in the draft are often teams that have a hard time selling tickets. The Calgary Flames will sell tickets if you and I were in Flames jerseys. Like, this town will buy NHL tickets. So you don't need to put Zane Parekh there to sell tickets or sell jerseys like you might have when Stamkos was signed or McDavid was signed, right? You don't need that instant bump. You can afford to let these guys develop. Maybe sell Wranglers tickets, which still gets fans in the door and beers sold and that sort of thing. But I think the Flames can afford, which some organizations can't, to take their time.
Yeah. Before we get to the situation in Chicago, one other Flames bit of news happened is there was one Flames draft pick that did make a junior selection camp, and that was Axel Hertag, pardon me, is on the Swedish roster. He was a 7th round pick. Again, interesting. And
so Hertag is a hitman right now.
As a Calgary hitman. So this is a guy, again, if you want to watch him, you can watch him at the Saddle Dome for Hitman games as well. So in Calgary. So you got, so we'll keep an eye on him. He's probably seems like going forward, he's going to be a Solyov, Kuznetsov type of guy, not sort of a defensive defenseman more than a Poirier type of guy. But
I don't know that Hertag has NHL potential from what I've seen of him. I mean, maybe, but I think this is a guy who could last in the AHL system for a while.
You need organizational depth, though.
You do. And as we talked about earlier with Walker Duehr, right, with Brent Sutter, like there's a lot of guys who made a decent living being AHL players. There's nothing wrong with that. If you're a professional hockey player and you can play professionally, great, do it. I envy those guys. I think a lot of people envy them. You don't have to make the NHL to be a good player or to make a decent living. Like, I think Hertag could be great organizational depth.
Yeah. And I haven't done the research on this yet, Dan, but I'm kind of the belief that if you can get a successful AHL Calder Cup contending team, I do think that in terms of a rebuild model, I think that eventually helps you win in the NHL because you're learning how to win, right?
You learn how to win. Yeah. And I think, often we see coaches promoted too, not just players. And I think then you get coaches that know how to win. Like you said, you got players that know how to win. You got those guys who know how to fight through the grind of the playoffs. I think it's good for everybody.
Yeah. And then we just need to quickly touch on this. Ilya Nikoliev was sent on waivers with the purpose of outright termination. He cleared. The Flames have terminated the contract. He hasn't played a game in the NHL. He was a 3rd round pick here a couple of seasons ago. I think it was let me just pull this up to make sure I have this right. It was, 23 years old. Drafted in 2021, I believe, and as a 3rd round pick. They've been able to recover that. Pardon me, it was a 2019 draft, but they've been able to recover this in terms of a draft pick. It's one of those situations that sometimes draft picks don't work out.
Yep. And again, a guy that I think had some potential. This is a guy who played, most of last season, 2022-23 in Rapid City in the ECHL. Like, I just don't think he's come along the way they expected him to, and that's okay too. And I think, sending him away, he's 23. I mean, you never know. Maybe he comes back to the NHL at some point, but he wasn't coming along. Even when I saw him in the AHL and a few times when I was able to watch an ECHL game, he just didn't look like he was really coming along the way they wanted him to. So like we were talking about earlier, he was drafted in the Pelletier draft, right? If you can get one guy out of each draft that's NHL ready, I think great. So Pelletier maybe, and Wolf for sure. I think the rest in that year, well, he didn't work out. And that's why you have 7 picks a year.
Yeah.
Nikolaev is already signed in the KHL with Lokomotiv Yaroslavl and yet to play a game there.
Yeah. 93 players have been drafted in the NHL that year. 42.9% have played. Average games so far has 13. Average goals, average career games 85. Goals 13, points 35, 32 penalty minutes average. So that's where we're at in terms of the 2019 draft. Which, before we go to the other NHL, which we're gonna connect the two stories we're talking about to the Flames. So this is now where I'm going to put up a challenge, Dan.
And Kevin, just before you go there, if you can, just talking about draft picks. I mean, this was during the Tree Living years when he liked to trade firsts and seconds for NHL players. Now, if we look at the Conroy years, Flames have tons of picks. I mean, last year they had tons of picks. This year they have tons of picks. So for every third that didn't hit, they're probably going to have 2/3 this year that might.
Exactly. Yeah. So,
or next year, the year after. Like, I think we're coming into an era where the Flames will have more than 7 picks a year.
Yeah. All right. So here now is the challenge, Dan, and then we're gonna blend a couple of stories into this conversation here that happened this week. So there are a number of Flames content creators, podcasters that have been proclaiming the idea of the tank to succeed. And they're putting up the content. They think they have some, or they are presenting some evidence that they believe that a tank is the way to win the Stanley Cup. And I am challenging them to a debate on this topic. And because I do not believe that the tanking concept leads to any form of championship. As a matter of fact, that I would argue the evidence to me shows it is the exact opposite to what has been presented. So if you believe in this tanking theory, then I want to challenge you to a debate. I will go on your show. You can come on our show. We can collaborate, which I think more of our podcast community needs to do anyway. So this is not about self-promotion, though. I want to be I think that this is an interesting discussion as we go forward with the Flames, which we are in a rebuilding era. Like nobody here, Dan, we're not saying we're not in a rebuild. Like, we agree we're in a rebuilding era. You haven't not heard me say we're not in a rebuilding area, right?
We are in a rebuilding era. I've heard that.
Yeah. So I want to see what this debate goes, because I think what the Flames are going to do going forward is going to impact how long this will take. And we have two cases in front of us that are worth the conversation. The Chicago Blackhawks this week fired Luke Richardson and replaced him with a new coach. I'm trying to make sure again. The other theme this week, Dan, a lot of people, a lot of names that are tough to pronounce.
You're getting your money's worth.
Yes. You would think I'm not a professional broadcaster or something, but
it's hard doing hockey because there's so many names from so many different places.
Yeah, I have always maintained, like, from a play-by-play perspective, there should be phonetic pronunciations of names and coaches, and because we can assume
there are. NHL broadcasts are given those, and they're available on the NHL media site.
Yes, but they should be also in lower levels as well. I think
you need somebody to do the work, and I think that's the hard part.
Yeah.
Teams don't always have someone to do that work.
Yeah. Excuse me. The new head coach of the Chicago Blackhawks is Anders Sorensen. And this has how I will relate this to the Flames. And sort of a little touch on their foreign agents. I don't want to say that I don't think that Connor Bedard was a snub, or do I think that Connor Bedard should have been on the foreign nations team? I think that there's a legitimate argument that Connor Bedard is a really good example of what tanking and why tanking doesn't work. If you look back at Connor Bedard's junior career, he spent it with the Regina Pats, and they were never really successful in the WHL. Of course, it's kind of tough and unfair because that was through the COVID years. But again, this speaks to part of the development concept of what we're going through with Connor Bedard. He was expected to carry the Regina Pats franchise and be sort of that guy. And then he's drafted into Chicago, and in a very, very large media market, the second or third largest media market in the United States, he's being paraded all over the place as a guy to be the face of the Blackhawks, which we do need to remind you of a couple of things here. The Blackhawks have a new TV situation where they are not on broadcast TV. They have their own TV network at this point. And then they also have the Winter Classic this year where Connor Bedard is going to be on the national stage again. So he's becoming appointment viewing and sort of this guy with the Chicago Blackhawks that everyone expects to watch. And they're not winning. And you could see this just wearing on him. So, and this is part of the problem of how you expect this guy to come in and kind of carry your franchise when he's 19. He's not ready to carry a franchise, Dan. And
this is what we were talking about with Parekh, right?
Yeah, this is exactly. It's funny. It's the same thing. You can't it's not. I'm not saying that you put Connor Bedard in the juniors or the AHL. And I know that they tried to insulate him with some other players. They brought in some veterans, but it certainly obviously hasn't worked out. He almost, I think that this probably him not getting on the Four Nations team is actually going to be a break from him because I think he literally needs one. I think there's just been too much put on this shoulder. It's very similar to the situation that Connor McDavid went through in Edmonton all those years ago too, where you're putting too much on this guy and you're not letting him play hockey. He's not having fun. And the coach, I don't think changing the coach is going to solve that, but you're again going through a situation where you're changing coaches, you're changing general managers, and you look at the Blackhawks, they've made some really questionable trades over the years where they probably could have been in a better situation where, they traded Kirby Dach for essentially nothing. They traded Alex DeBrincat for essentially nothing and Brandon Hagel for essentially nothing. So those are three guys you could have built a core around and you didn't do it. And now you're in this situation where you had to pay for some veterans unnecessarily. And you're probably going to be picking in the top 5 again. And maybe, you know what, according to that, you're going to get a high talented player. But I think the question that I would ask that is at what cost?
Mm-hmm.
To the organization and to Bedard himself, because I think that this is where this is wearing on him. Like when you watch him play, it's wearing on him. And again, this is also a guy that probably Team Canada wasn't a super fan of Connor Bedard and actually benched him during the junior tournament in Edmonton because of his poor defensive play. And I do think that this was something, as much as everybody was excited about his offense, Dan, his defense did come into question. And again, we talked about having to be an all-round player. And of course, Bedard is exciting, but he does need to understand the defensive game because a lot of coaches expect it, and he hasn't quite developed that. So
but this is going back to what I was saying with Parekh, right? Where teams will bring in a guy who I think they know they can use to sell jerseys. And I think that's what he was. He was touted as the great guy. And I think sometimes we overhype these guys because in a way, the NHL marketing engine is at work.
Yeah.
Let's hype this guy up as the next great thing so we can get him in all our betting commercials and all of our, sponsorship and all that because they need all the money associated with that, whether the guy is ready or not. And I mean, as a 19-year-old, I question how many 18, 19, 20-year-olds are actually NHL ready.
I would say that that's under 2%.
I think it'd be fascinating if the NHL had a rule that you couldn't play in the league until you're 20 or even 21. Like until you're an adult by, U.S. standards, why are you playing in a men's league as a child?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it would give a lot more interest to the AHL, and I think you would get to really see where guys were at.
I mean, and I think you look back at the development through COVID. I think we'll have to look back on that. I think one of the things when you do your redrafts and stuff, I think I think a lot of these players were underdeveloped because they weren't able to play hockey. They weren't able to
Sure,
play a lot
during COVID, I agree, but this is not the first time I think we've seen, first rounders that, or, first, second, third overall that didn't turn out all that great.
Yeah, of course. I mean, there's a historic, and I'm not saying that Connor Bedard is not going to be a great player, but I also think, like, you look at the situation with Macklin Celebrini, he's in a better situation in San Jose where they did bring some veterans, but they didn't have a lot of expectations tossed around that.
Yeah.
And he's in a market where, I mean, San Jose is a good hockey market. It's not a Chicago hockey market. So
Nope.
he's allowed to play his game. And I think that's
and even Mitch Koff in Philadelphia,
who, as much as Torts has said this, as much as Torts has gotten some flack for it, he scratched Mitch Koff for a couple of games.
Yep.
So, yeah, again, you've got head coaches that have expectations, right? So,
I mean, on the tanking thing, I've said for years on Fireside Chat, I don't want to see the Flames tank. I don't want to see the Flames tank. Play the best you can. Be as competitive as you can. And I think fans have started to conflate tanking with just getting a low pick. Like, you can get a low pick and not tank. Last year, San Jose did not tank. They were just not good.
they were
Right?
off.
I mean, the Coyotes, right, were not good. They got a high pick. So I think sometimes there's this notion that getting a high pick means tanking. And I think tanking is a very deliberate effort. I mean, I think we've seen Buffalo make that effort. I think, like you said, we've seen Chicago make that effort. I think that's a terrible thing for your organization. I'm not against the Flames. I mean, let's be honest. The Flames, as we've talked about, are not good. They will get a high pick because they're not good, right? But they put together a team. They thought, you know what, let's run these guys and have them play the best they can. But I hate the idea of tanking. I think we need to separate the idea of tanking from the idea of just getting a pick because that's where you are in your cycle.
Yeah. And I think the other thing with that, though, too, is just because you have a top 10 pick does not guarantee you championship success. As much as people will present the argument of top 10 picks that have led to cups. There have been top 10 picks that have led to disaster.
Yeah,
right?
and I think both ways. I mean, Calgary has sort of cited the Calgary's kind of cited the Dallas model, right? Yeah. Of sort of a rebuild. And if we look, I have Dallas's picks pulled up here. Let's just go through, say, their top 2 picks since 2015. Yeah. 2015, Denis Gurianov and Rupe Hintz was the second round pick.
Yeah.
In 2016, Riley Tuft was their first round pick at 25. Frederick Karlstrom in their second, or actually in the third round. 2017, Mikko Heiskanen, number 3. Jake Ottinger, also in the first round, number 26. 2018, Ty Dellandrea at 13 and Albin Eriksson in the second round. 2019, Thomas Hartley in the first round. 2020, Maverick Bourque at 30th. 2021, Wyatt Johnson at 23. 2022, Leon Bichelle. Like, these are not top names, right? And they're not
Wyatt
getting
Johnson
the top
will
picks.
be a top name.
He will be, yeah. And I think even Maverick Bourque is looking good, but he was 30th. Wyatt Johnson was 23rd, right? I mean, Ty Dellandrea did not really land. Mikko Heiskanen's been good. Ottinger's been good. Riley Tuft was not a great pick. Like, this is not a team that's I think done really well and is a good team in the league, but they haven't quote unquote tanked to get top picks. I mean, their top pick in there was 3rd overall. And you could even argue that, okay, even though they had Ottinger at 26, the Flames have the Ottinger piece in Wolf, right? They've got now the Heiskanen piece, the top defenseman in Parekh. So I think if Dallas can do it with those kind of picks, and, again, like 2019 picked 1st and then 4th, 2020 picked 1st and then 4th. Like, you've got to get those depth picks to make this work.
Yeah. Yeah. And, but
I agree with you. Show me a team that's actually tanked that's doing well. I mean, Buffalo is a great example and nobody wants to play there.
Yeah, which leads to the second story and that we want to talk about. Kevin Adams had a press conference on Friday. Kevin Adams said that the problem with Buffalo is they don't have palm trees, which is not true. There was a palm tree at KeyBank Center in the game yesterday, a game that they played yesterday against Utah. I saw it in the crowd. There is a palm tree. There's at least one palm tree in Buffalo. But he also talked about the taxes, which – and so and a number of other things. It was kind of a disastrous press conference overall. Now, what is interesting, Dan, about Buffalo that I think people forget is they actually have drafted really well. They drafted a late round pick, Linus Ullmark, a late round pick in Brandon Hagel. Both of those are in the Four Nations, so they're good. You could agree that they're good players, right? Ullmark wins a Vezina. The big tank that they did, the specific clear tank, was the year that Jack Eichel was drafted, and they were hoping for Connor McDavid. They were hoping that would give them the first pick, and they were going for McDavid. They ended up with Jack Eichel. Now, that's not a bad pick. He obviously has won a cup with Vegas. The mistake that they did I'm going to point out 3 trades that they did that floundered them. And the situation with Jack Eichel and how they handled that neck surgery was abysmal, because ultimately, if they just would have said, okay, you get the surgery that you want. I mean, this is your franchise center. That was just crazy to me that you're not even doing the neck surgery that he wants or working with him. And being stubborn on that was inane. But they didn't even get close to enough for Jack Eichel. They got a guy in Alex Tuck who is a serviceable piece, and Peyton Krebs, who's going to be a serviceable forward and a first-round pick. But that wasn't close to nearly enough to get for a Jack Eichel. Then you traded a Sam Reinhart as well, and you got Devin Levi. And Devin Levi was a guy that a lot of people had some hopes for Team Canada because he was on the World Junior team, but he clearly wasn't ready to be in the NHL. And so that didn't really work out. And Reinhart's he's got 20 goals and leading the league in the NHL, goals, has a Stanley Cup. And then the other one was the trade for Rasmus Ristolainen, which they gave up a first-round pick and a Robert Haig. And Robert Haig is a 7th defenseman at best in the National Hockey League. And Isaac Rosen was the first pick for Rasmus Ristolainen. He hasn't played a game yet in the NHL. So you got 3 trades here that simply – you can argue about the free agent if people want to go and play on free agency. In Buffalo, I don't think people want to go and play in Winnipeg either here. Dan, they're not spending a hell of a lot of money on free agency, but they're making shrewd enough trades that they're keeping themselves successful. And, I feel like Winnipeg and Buffalo are sort of a similar style of franchise, and you can see one team being successful with their model and the other one is simply not.
Well, I guess it depends how we define success. I mean, there was talk at the beginning of the season that Winnipeg wasn't selling tickets, right? So what are we, I mean, and what do we call success? The Stanley Cup success? Is ticket selling success? I mean, I think there's teams like
Winnipeg's a consistent playoff. I would say at least if we're going to use the Dallas model as a model for the Flames, the one thing that we can say with Dallas is they've been a consistent playoff team.
For sure. But I think there's also organization groups, like if we talk to Maple Leaf Sports Entertainment, who are happy selling every seat they've got and maybe not going deep in the playoffs. Like I think you have to find success in your market, right? I think for the Flames, they would say the playoffs are success. I don't know that's true in every market. I think the big thing with Chicago and Buffalo. Well, sorry, before I go there, if you want to comment on that comment.
Well, to me, I think the way that I look at it is it's the hardest trophy to win is the Stanley Cup in professional sports. So I think your best chance of winning the Stanley Cup is getting playoff experience. And even like you look at you're not going to win it every year, but you look at the teams that have won the Stanley Cup, they went through some pretty significant upsets and failures getting their way there. Like you look at Tampa had their people forget that before Tampa won the Stanley Cup, they got swept by Columbus when they had the best record in the NHL history.
Yeah.
So, and then you had Washington before they won the cup. Ovechkin could not get past Sidney Crosby. They had some President Trophy winners in that as well, right? So even Boston, before they won the 2011 Cup, they blew a 3-0 series lead. Like you've had those failures before you win, right? So I just don't think it's like I think, is it the ultimate success that you're in the playoffs? No, but you look even at in Toronto's situation, there were years that they weren't even close to the playoffs. They were the joke of the National Hockey League. Now, just
for sure.
So, and now the Leafs are an actual successful, and I don't want to say this too loud, Dan, but the Leafs are actually kind of interesting to watch.
They are. Yeah. And, I think if we look at, say, Buffalo, Chicago, and I'd even throw Edmonton in that period. I mean, these organizations where the GMs were really kind of, not experienced picks. The coaches, guys didn't want to play for. I think that's a big reason why players didn't want to go to these markets. It wasn't so much there's no palm trees or no tax, but during these quote unquote tank periods, they didn't have the staff. I mean, look at Edmonton, who was just hiring the next alumni guy up for a while. And I think this is where Dallas and Calgary have done things differently. If they're bringing in people that people want to play for, I think Huska's well respected as a development coach. I think Conroy, while he may not have experience, you got to start somewhere, right? So I think he's capable. And I think they've surrounded him with Dave Nonis and, guys like that who are capable. I think they're building the right group and not just kind of saying, okay, let's put someone there to keep the heartbeat going. And they're doing it differently in that case of actually being serious about not just the players or maybe not the players, but at least bringing in the right hockey ops people.
Yeah. I think that's where Buffalo certainly has stumbled over the years.
For sure.
I think their scouting staff seems to have figured it out because they can draft. They you look at Buffalo Sabres draft history. It's good. They just cannot keep these players.
Well, I don't think they develop them well, and you're right. They can't keep them. And I think a lot of keeping them is how you treat your guys off the ice and on the ice, and also do you want to play there? It's not just. I think the whole tax thing is silly. Everyone else pays taxes, right? You're working, you should pay taxes. That's my thought too. Whether you're a pro athlete or a plumber or a truck driver, we all work in places where there are no palm trees. That's fine, but. We see guys want to play in Calgary and want to play in Winnipeg. There's no palm trees there either, but they treat their players really well.
Yeah.
They have good hockey people, you can learn from and work with.
Yeah. They found a way to keep Scheifele and Hellebuck in Winnipeg.
Yeah.
And and I think that this is why this it's just interesting to me because I think that it's the development model that wins you cups. It's not about finding those top 10, Robert Munich brought up Chicago and LA from a few years ago. And I think the thing that has been forgotten, yes, they did get Blackhawks got Taves and Kane. Yes, the Kings got Kopitar and Doughty, but you look what they drafted around that time too. Blackhawks drafted Duncan Keith and Brent Seabrook around that time. Corey Crawford was drafted in the second round at that time. They even got Dustin Byfuglien through that. So there was a lot of guys that they got. Troy Brouwer was drafted and part of that team. What they drafted around that also built them the cup, I would argue. And even you look at that Kings team, they drafted Tyler Toffoli. Jonathan Quick was a draft pick there in the third round, the same draft that they got Anze Kopitar in. I just because you have a couple of top 10 picks, that's great, but I don't think it guarantees you. This is a team game, and you need to have depth in a 4-round series to win the Stanley Cup. And Florida is a good example of this. And even you look at Florida before everyone talked about the no taxes in Florida, that organization had empty seats, and we were wondering if there was going to be a team in Florida. Mm-hmm. And then they make the Matthew Tkachuk trade. Which, if you look, ultimately, it breaks my heart to say this from a Flames perspective, but that won them the Stanley Cup. They don't win the cup without Matthew Tkachuk.
They don't. And, I think there's a lot of things that go into, like you said, successful team. And Tkachuk wanted to be in Florida, but at the same time, you can only have so many guys per team, right? And not everybody can play in those scenarios. So at some point, it's go do what you're doing wherever you are and just be good at it. And when we're talking about guys who, like you're saying, who draft really well and GMs who value the draft, look at how much McDavid's probably going to make in his next deal. Look at what Ottinger's making. Look at what these top players are making. You can't afford 9 or 10 top players. You can't afford to tank for 5-6 years and fill your roster that way. You need guys that can come in and play at league minimum or $1 million or whatever. So you need that proper drafting all the way through, or things aren't going to work for you because you're not going to be able to afford your roster.
Yeah, and you look at the Leaf situation with the core four. with Matthews, Marner, Tavares, Nylander, and all the money that they put, it's taken a little bit of a while for them to kind of find those pieces. And part of it is they finally drafted a Bobby McMahon and a Matthew Nyes. And, unfortunately, Roman Idorov passed away, but they've actually started to do a little bit better in their drafting, and it has improved, and that's helped them be a competitive team.
And what you're talking about with Florida, not everybody can be the top player, right? You need a Matthew Lomberg on your roster as much as you need a Matthew Tkachuk on your roster. So you can't expect, Ryan Lomberg. Yeah, you can't expect that everybody's going to be a top player, right? Not everybody can be Connor McDavid. So you've got to look at that as, okay, maybe we do need those one or two really high-end guys, but we also need to make sure we're bringing in our Lombergs and our Rooneys, and, you need 4 lines of players. And I think sometimes I think the NHL, more than some other sports, really fans, especially casual fans, hyper-fixate on the big name and don't appreciate a lot of the depth. I mean, it's same as the NFL, right? You can't just have a quarterback. You need a bunch of, let's be honest, maybe no-name linemen to line up in front of him.
Yeah. And you look at some of those championship teams, it's those unsung heroes that put you from winner to loser to winner.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think you've got to build it all. And I still think for the Flames, they have some building to do. And if they don't necessarily get that star guy right away, that's okay. I think you could wait a year, 2 years, 3 years to quote unquote tank, or let's just call it get a higher pick, and then drop that guy in with some younger players already established around them.
Yeah. And I also think it depends on the strength of draft as well, right? Like there's some drafts that are going to be better than others. So, I mean, just having a top 10 pick, that doesn't necessarily mean just because one is a top 10 pick for 1 year doesn't mean that they're a top 10 pick for another year. So
exactly. Yeah. And in some cases, I think we have to look at too, like, we've talked about, yes, top 10 picks are exciting, and yes, they're good players, and that's why they're there. But I would like to, and maybe not today, because we've been going a while and we don't have the data, but how many times have we seen an organization maybe make a 20th pick, develop it really well, and that guy turned out to be the face of the franchise? Like, do you have to be that, say, top 10 pick to quote unquote lead your franchise? And I'm of the belief, with the way Calgary seems to be able to develop, that they could bring in a guy and develop him to be the way they need him to be if he was outside the top 10. Fix skating, fix the the two-way play, whatever it is that was the issue there.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It would be interesting to go through that development, because I have some names at the top of my list that are, but I mean, I think it needs a little bit more research.
Yeah.
So, all right. Is there anything else we need to talk about?
That's it for me.
All right. Well, you tell us what you guys are up to at the Fireside Chat?
Fireside Chat. We have a new episode coming out tomorrow on Monday. We recorded yesterday. We're going to be talking about all things Flames, looking ahead at this tough week for the Flames, and if this is the week that we might start to see them falter as they're taking on some really good teams, and what that might look like. We talk about a lot of things that Kevin and I talked about today. What's going to happen with Pelletier and Dewar, what's going to happen with Kuzmenko, the Johnny Gaudreau scenario. So if you want more Flames news, you can find us every week. We're at firesidechat.ca. You can find all our social media links there, or wherever you find podcasts. Find us there. If you're not a podcast listener or don't listen regularly, don't know where to find podcasts, if you go to firesidechat.ca, you can sign up for our email list. In the sidebar, you'll see an email list, and we will email you pretty much every week when we send out new episodes. So some people prefer that. We'll do that as well. So however you want to listen to us, let us know. We'll find a way to get you those episodes.
And we talk Canucks and Flames here, so separately. So Sean and Tyler did an episode Wednesday talking to Canucks. Sean is going to bring in Game Over Oilers Graham Mosman in on Wednesday to chat Canucks Oilers. We've been kind of waiting to do that Canucks Oilers debate, so that's going to happen. Graham being in Edmonton and an Oilers honk. So we'll have that coming up. And then you can follow us on Twitter at Shifts and Pucks, or X, or social media, so Shifts and Pucks, Facebook.com Shifts and Pucks, YouTube.com Shifts and Pucks, and Twitch.com Shifts and Pucks. Subscribe wherever you get your audio. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We will talk to you all very soon. Bye for now.